Okay. I would like to talk about two basic forms of reasoning according to formal logic. Some of you may be familiar with these. They're modus tollens and modus tollens. These are the two of the most fundamental ways of forming not a syllogism, but no, I guess it is a syllogism. Well, maybe it isn't because it doesn't have three terms. But here's the way modus ponens works. You say, if P, then Q. Then secondly, you say P, that is, I assert P. And then thirdly, you conclude Q. That's modus ponens. So you're sort of directly saying, if I shoot you, you will die. I shoot you, therefore you die. That's modus ponens reasoning. Modus tollens is the other sort of inverse of that. If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So that would be, that's modus tollens. That would correspond to saying, if I shoot you, then you die. You are not dead, therefore I have not shot you. Both of these are perfectly sound from a formal logic perspective. Both of them are entirely logically sound. But and they're actually sort of interchangeable with one another. Like, you can see that their forms are fairly similar, but formal logic likes to do sort of mathematical footwork with logical terminology and logical phrasing to translate one into the other, and you end up with sort of a bracketed statement, and it's a bit more complicated, but you can turn one into the other, and so forth, and back and forth. Just like you can, without going into detail, just like you can turn a subtraction into an addition by saying that you're adding a negative number. So it's a similar move to that. Now, when it comes to actual reasoning, I've sort of noticed over a long period of time that I have a strong preference for modus ponens as opposed to modus tollens. Because it's nice to say, if I shoot you, then you die. I shoot you, therefore you die, or you're not dead, therefore I haven't shot you. It's nice to say that, but most formal logic really has a lot of limitations when it comes to actual reasoning that goes on in actual arguments. What actually ends up seeming to happen is, for any controversial issue, you have people saying that the evidence leads you to conclude such and such a conclusion. And you have other people saying, no, that evidence, the conclusion is so abhorrent, so undesirable, so inconsistent with what we know or believe or what seems right, that the evidence must be flawed. So, in practical effect, and maybe I'm using these terms a little bit loosely, excuse me, in practical effect, they kind of work like two ways of looking at a problem. One way is to say whatever conclusion the evidence gives you is what you should conclude. That's modus ponens. And modus tollens is saying, if the conclusion is really messed up or undesirable, we really should look at the evidence and see if there's something wrong with it. Now, there's a time and a place for both of these things, but I think in a lot of controversial issues, you end up with, in a lot of the controversial issues, you end up with a lot of people who don't want to make the conclusion because it's so abhorrent. And I think that's just unballsy. I think that's just a case of grow-a-pair-itis. You need to accept the conclusion, as abhorrent as it is, of what the evidence points to. Of course, things aren't as tight and as neat as in a logical formulation of, if P, then Q. But basically, I think that modus tollens has very little place. I mean, there's a number of logical errors that you can make arguing in the, I'd say, modus tollens style of reasoning. First of all, the case of not Q is very arguable. The case of not Q is very arguable because usually the conclusion is the one that's a metaphysical or moral principle that people don't want to, they don't want to say, well, you know, if evolution is true, then our morality has nothing but a human framework. Or if atheism is true, or if theism is false, so if theism is false, then our morality has nothing but a human foundation to it. And this is abhorrent, and I can't accept it, so I will reject atheism on those grounds. And that's the not Q, is saying that it's not acceptable. Maybe the point should be made that modus tollens isn't flawed. It's just that what ends up happening a lot of times is people say that something is unacceptable instead of, in place of what the argument requires, that it is not. And I guess the confusion between what's acceptable and what is not is what causes the logical flaw in the application of modus tollens. Because I would say, in that case of morality having only a human framework, you should just accept that it only has a human framework. You should accept that that's where the evidence points, if indeed that's where the evidence points.